Environmental justice warrior or whack job eco-terrorist? We'll let you decide on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. I just returned from a few days in northern Colombia reporting on the flow of migrants that are moving toward the United States. And there's some really good information in yesterday's podcast that really isn't making it into the mainstream news yet, such as how the migrants are paying for their trips and what their routing is. So I'm hoping to do some more reporting on that later this week, but getting access to the camps here in Panama is a difficult process, so we'll see if I can make that work or not. If you listen often, would you consider supporting the podcast? You know, back in the day, you'd pay 15 or 20 bucks a month to get a daily newspaper or a weekly magazine. Well, I'm cranking out more than an hour of meaningful, entertaining, and informative content about important world events every week. So subscribing over at patreon.com/hotzone for $3 a month doesn't feel like too much to ask. And if you really want to help some of the people I meet, you can donate even more than that. For one-time donations, send those via PayPal to holtocw@gmail.com. That's holtocw, there's no N in there, at gmail.com. All right, let's talk eco-terrorism.
In Vail, Colorado, the nation's busiest ski resort was hit today by a fire. Arson is suspected.
You may have heard of the Earth Liberation Front. The Attorney General himself says it's a domestic terrorist organization. The FBI says it is one of the most dangerous groups in the country.
The ELF has claimed responsibility for more than 24 major acts of eco-terrorism since 1996.
Fire bombings include attacks on lumber mills, wild horse corrals, and 2 meat packing plants.
So far, not one of the cases has ever been solved, and authorities acknowledge they know next to nothing about the membership or the leadership of the organization.
We're seeing more and more climate change protests happening around the globe. Many times they turn out just to be kind of wacky, like when some activists in Great Britain superglued themselves to farm trucks earlier this year. But sometimes these protests get violent.
What do we want? Climate action! When do we want it? Now!
We don't want to inconvenience people. We know that people are busy and it's not our goal to make them stand in traffic, but we feel that traditional methods of collectivism and petitioning our representatives hasn't worked, so direct action is our last chance.
Frankly, I mean, this is like disrupting everybody's life. To do what? I understand. You see, like, they're doing it again. Somebody may be wanting to reach somewhere and they can't reach on time.
I think you got to attack the problem through legislation. They should be doing the protest in places that aren't creating this, right? I mean, you know how much fuel is being burned by people idling their cars, right?
But they say we tried that for decades. We tried the legislation, but they didn't work. What do you tell them?
I think you try harder because this isn't working. This isn't working.
This is what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like!
Petitions, marches, it does nothing. I mean, we've now got to stop non-violent civil disobedience is the only way to bring people's attention to it. We're always sorry that we inconvenience people, but there is, at this point, there's no choice. There's really no choice.
Last week in Germany, thousands of activists protesting against coal-fired power trespassed on the site of the municipal town of Juechen. It's a open pit mine there, coal mine. On Saturday, a group of activists then attempted to barge their way through a line of police, resulting in clashes with the officers and mine workers. Local media has reported 2 officers were injured in the clashes. The mine, which they call an open cast mine there, but here in the States would be called a strip mine, in Western Germany has become a focus of environmental protest in recent years because its operator threatened to cut down a nearby forest. German police had mobilized hundreds of officers and water cannon to prevent the vast open pit mine and adjacent power plants from being blocked by protesters. But from the footage, it appears the cops weren't all that successful at it. The FBI defines ecoterrorism as the use or threatened use of violence of a criminal nature against innocent victims or property by an environmentally oriented subnational group for environmental or political reasons, or aimed at an audience beyond the target, often of a symbolic nature. The FBI credited eco-terrorists with $200 million in property damage in the United States between 2003 and 2008. Now, these kinds of actions are happening on an increasing basis all over the globe as climate change zealots get more and more bold and try to shut down many of the industries that make modern life possible. A few weeks ago, an organization called Extinction Rebellion released threats to shut down London Heathrow Airport with drones, and that's something that's happened more than once already, because its members say air travel is, quote, genocidal. Now, while the majority of states in the United States have introduced laws against prohibiting eco-terrorism, that's not stopping many of these wacky protests and direct actions. I've been reporting on these groups since 2009 because some of them operate out of an area only a few miles away from my farm in West Virginia. Check this out.
It's springtime here in southern West Virginia, and with the temperatures warming up and leaves coming out on the trees, it's easy to see why this state's motto is almost heaven. But beauty won't put food on the table. That takes jobs. And around here, jobs mean coal.
Coal mining has a rich history in Appalachia that continues today, providing more than 70,000 direct, higher-paying jobs in West Virginia. Today, those jobs face an uncertain future. Environmental groups are lobbying the Obama administration to crack down on some of the practices essential to getting the coal out of the ground. One of the main targets, the practice of mountaintop removal mining. Jimmy Cook is with Massey Energy, the fourth largest coal company in the U.S. He points out that mountaintop removal is rarely practiced anymore.
All these permits and all the Republic have are what they call AOC permits, approximate original contour, which means when we mine out here that we have to put the mountain back within 50 feet of how it was originally.
His miners scrape away the soil to get at the seams of coal underneath. But once that's done, the mountain must be painstakingly rebuilt.
So we'll move in here in spring planting season. We'll come out here and we'll plant all this with the native hardwoods, or the hardwoods that are native to this area and what the permit calls for.
But sometimes landowners have other plans.
Whether it's, it's a flume or a ditch or a pond, when you go back to the landowner and say, okay, we're done here, we're going to put this back the way it was, they'll tell you no. They'll say, I want that road there. I want that pond because me and my grandkids go fish in that pond now.
But that's not the only opinion. Longtime resident Judy Bonds helps oversee Coal River Mountain Watch, an organization that opposes mountaintop removal.
Because they're creating moonscapes out of mountains that were once productive, and how blasphemous it is of people to say we can do a better job than God. Below mountaintop removal sites, there are selenium discharges that deform fish. And basically, we're looking at science as well as common sense for what we've known for a long time.
We have never had any problem with our drinking water.
Megan Skaggs' children attend Marsh Fork Elementary, located right next to a controversial coal mine.
My husband, working in the coal mines, allows me to stay at home to take care of my children. West Virginia provides 50% of the nation's electricity, and the people that are against coal mining, I think they should turn their lights out, move somewhere else.
But some environmentalists are doing just the opposite, moving into the area to protest the mines. That includes Mike Roselle, who came here from Montana to start Climate Ground Zero.
But I think if you look at North America, this is really one of the most egregious ways that we get our coal. And it comes at a very, very high price, not only because we lose the mountains and the forests, but they bury the streams. And they're producing a lot of toxic waste.
His group's protests take a strong activist approach, including trespassing on mine property and civil disobedience.
Well, we've had 5 protests over the last 6 weeks where we have entered the blasting area where Massey is blowing up the rocks to load out and start the mining. So we've been trying to physically block them from doing that.
These kinds of protests are drawing criticism from the coal companies and residents alike, who point out that Mike Roselle helped found an organization that led to the Earth Liberation Front, labeled by the FBI as one of America's most active and destructive domestic terrorist groups.
But Mike says that's not what his group's about.
What we do when people come here is we make them sign a pledge that they will not engage in any property destruction, and so far everyone who's come here has agreed to do that.
Some say one man's environmental crusader is another man's eco-terrorist. But to the people here, the bigger issue is what effect this dispute will have on jobs in the region.
If valley fills are being targeted, then that could have a serious detrimental impact to all types of coal mining.
Randy Huffman is with the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection.
And in West Virginia, quite frankly, with our terrain, if we're going to have a future economy after coal, we need to be able to use the coal mining practices that are taking place today in order to create developable land and suitable land that can be used to build a diversified economy in the future.
This mountaintop was strip mined about 30 years ago. Back then, there were a lot fewer regulations as to what they had to do when they were finished extracting the coal. But you can see it's recovering pretty well, and the farmers that use this area say that it's good for hay and for cattle. For me, it's just a lot of fun. Dave Hutchison has farmed this mountain all his life.
You cannot block water. It's impossible. Can't be done. It's got too much power. Plus, they put in sediment ponds to catch the silt and the runoff. The environmentalists are taking what small information that they're having, and the public's being totally misinformed about the whole concept of strip mining. Me and my wife, we really love this place, and we love West Virginia, and we couldn't imagine living anywhere else.
And that's one thing upon which almost everyone here can agree.
I would like to think that we have a future. And when I see what's going on right now, I'm very concerned that we really don't have a future.
We have about 240 employees, but every one of these guys live right here. And they'll tell you, every one of them will tell you, they love it. They love the land, they love to hunt and fish, and they're proud of what they do. They're proud of this operation, and they know what we do to be stewards of the land, to take care of it and do the right thing.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, in southern West Virginia. Now, let me tell you, those people don't get much of a friendly reception in southern West Virginia. While I was filming this piece, I was at the school you saw there, and there were some miners and their families playing baseball on the local playground. Now, as I set up my camera to take shots of the school, all of a sudden I was surrounded by big burly coal miners who just assumed I was some liberal CNN journalist or something. And let me tell you, that's about as close as I've ever come to getting my arms ripped off doing this job. Fortunately, at the last minute, a policeman friend of mine drove up and told the miners that I was one of the fair journalists and that they could trust me. That changed everything, and that's how I got the interview with the wife of that coal miner. Our farm used to be a strip mine about 30 years ago, and I get that these kids see the mines working today and think that it looks like a moonscape. It kind of does. But you can't look at our place 30 years later and say the mining that took place there did any lasting damage. Our farm's now almost all forest, except for the pastures that were carved out of the mountainside by the coal company, and those only made the property more valuable and useful. I think the lesson here is that we can easily come to believe that humans are much more powerful than we really are when it comes to harming nature. Now, sure, we have the responsibility to take care of the planet. It is, after all, the only home we have. But the antics of these self-declared eco-warriors do nothing to draw people to their cause. If anything, it makes people hate it all the more. And the big takeaway I found while investigating this is that, at least for the Earth First movement and that justice movement that I was reporting on there in West Virginia, they employed grant writers who were able to secure funding from the EPA in the form of what were called environmental justice grants. They then took those taxpayer dollars and used the money to pay for bail when their activists got arrested. Now, that's just wrong. Using taxpayer funds to break the law, that should not happen. They also told me they received funding from groups like the Sierra Club, who obviously want to keep a friendly image in the press while letting the eco-terrorists like Mike Roselle do their dirty work for them. Roselle still resides in West Virginia and still advocates for direct action against companies he deems to be climate sinners. And from the looks of things, his religion, and that's really what it is gaining new converts all the time. All right, that's all I have for today, folks. Thanks for watching and sharing the podcast. We'll be back again tomorrow, right here on The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.